Cain, where are you? Where is your brother, Abel? The very dust of the earth drinks the blood of your brother, and that blood cries out to me from the ground, a persistent voice demanding justice. You may move among the shadows of the valleys, but you cannot hide from my presence. Why are you doing this to me, God? Your judgment defined my life, but I will not be broken by it. Here, upon this desolate earth, I will build my new empire, a kingdom defined by my own strength, and I will avenge what God did to me. The year 4000 before Christ. In the ancient land of Mesopotamia, in the vast territory that we now know as Iraq, humanity took its first, uncertain steps outside the guarded gates of paradise. Adam and Eve now lived in a fertile but unforgiving land, lush with growth yet perpetually marked by the burning memory of the perfection they had lost. They began their lives as the first parents in human history. Eve soon conceived and, in pain and wonder, gave birth to her firstborn son. She held the child in her arms, looking at Adam, and declared firmly, "With the help of the Lord, I have brought forth a man, a new beginning." The child was named Cain, a word reflecting possession and acquisition. A sign of hope rested from the curse. Time passed, bringing seasons of planting and harvesting, and Eve conceived again. She gave birth to her second son, Abel, the quiet younger brother whose arrival completed the first human family settled on those wide Mesopotamian plains, poised between the lingering sorrow of Eden and the hard reality of their new existence. In this primitive landscape, defined by the winding paths of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, the lives of the first two children born outside of paradise unfolded, inaugurating the true first chapters of human history. As time passed, Cain and Abel grew into strong young men, and their inherent natures led them to different, specialized occupations. Cain dedicated himself entirely to working the land. His shoulders broadened and his hands grew thick and calloused from the grueling effort of breaking the soil, meticulously sowing the seeds, and finally harvesting the reluctant crops. He spent endless hours under the relentless, punishing sun, constantly battling the tenacity of stones, the caprice of the weather, and the inherent harshness of the terrain that had been cursed for his father's sake. Abel, conversely, found his place among the restless flocks. He had been a shepherd since he was a mere boy, his movements quiet and deliberate. He knew each of his animals intimately, guiding them gently and protecting them fiercely from predators. His life flowed among rolling hills, following ancient paths of grass and sky, his world defined by the quiet rhythm of the herd. Then, the appointed day arrived to present a sacred offering to the divine presence. Cain brought the heavy fruits of his harvest, grain, dried produce, and bundles of straw. Abel offered the very best of his flock, the choicest, youngest lambs, a sacrifice of blood and purity. When the veil of the divine presence descended, it inclined visibly and unmistakably toward the shepherd's offering. The farmer's offering remained untouched, unanswered, and ignored. Cain's face, usually masked by the stoicism of hard labor, changed in an instant. His eyes hardened into dark stones. His breathing became ragged, shallow bursts of air escaping his clenched jaw, and something ancient, cold, and deeply corrosive stirred within the depths of his soul, envy laced with wounded pride. Hours later, shrouded in the long, cooling shadows of late afternoon, Cain sought out his brother. He spoke in a voice that was strained and dangerously feigned. "Abel, can you come here? I want to talk for a moment." "Sure, Cain," Abel replied innocently, setting down his staff. "What's up?" "I need to understand what happened today," Cain forced out, his eyes fixed on the horizon, avoiding Abel's gaze. "Okay, let's talk," Abel replied, a flicker of natural unease starting to register in his tone. "Why you and not me?" Cain demanded, turning his gaze sharply onto his brother. Abel looked at him, tension hardening the soft lines of his face. I don't know, brother," he said in a voice deliberately kept low. "I just brought the best I had, nothing more. It was what was required. Sometimes I feel you're simply closer to God than I am," Cain stated, the bitterness tasting like dust in his mouth. Abel swallowed hard, a visible sign of nervousness. Don't think like that, Cain. We're family. We're not enemies. We share the same parents and the same hope. Then tell me, Abel, why do I feel less? Why do I feel like he doesn't even look at me? Cain asked, his voice escalating, bordering on a plea. Abel instinctively stepped back slightly, replying with visible discomfort. Cain, listen to me. I did nothing against you. I only sought to obey the command. But Cain was no longer listening to reason or plea. The cumulative tension of his grueling life, the fresh, searing inner wound of rejection, and the poisonous brew of envy mixed dangerously, finally reaching the breaking point. I can't take it anymore, he muttered through teeth tightly gritted. In a dark, overwhelming impulse, he stooped and snatched a heavy field stone from the dirt. He lunged violently at Abel, raising the weapon high, and brought it down in a brutal arc. Abel collapsed instantly, lifeless. A terrible silence fell over the field, a hush that seemed to absorb the sudden scream of violence. Abel's body lay motionless, a dark stain quickly blooming on the pale earth. Cain breathed heavily, taking wide, gasping steps backward, surveying what he had done with a terrifying mixture of paralyzing fear and ugly, wounded pride. He leaned over the cooling corpse, stared down at the peaceful face of his brother, and his contempt finally boiled over. I'm sorry, Abel, he spat, though his eyes showed no remorse. I could forgive many things, but I couldn't forgive you for being better than me, for being accepted when I was spurned. So, you brought this upon yourself. Now what will I do with your body? Cain exclaimed, running a panicked hand through his hair. Looking around desperately, he murmured, I'll put it under these plants, hide it from sight. Cain hurriedly cleaned the blood from his hands on the rough grass, then dragged the heavy body to a cluster of thick, low bushes. He frantically dug a shallow depression and hastily hid the corpse under loose, freshly turned earth. When he finished, he stood up, dusted the dirt from his tunic, and walked away, attempting to behave as if nothing monumental, nothing irreversible had occurred. But what he didn't realize, what he could not escape, was that God had seen absolutely everything. Hours later, as he trudged back toward the parental settlement, a powerful, unseen presence stopped him dead in his tracks. The wind, which had been whipping through the tall grasses, abruptly died down. The entire atmosphere grew thick, silent, and heavy with judgment. The voice of God, bursting into his conscience with unmistakable, terrifying authority, demanded, Where is your brother? Cain physically recoiled, then forced himself to turn tense, trying desperately to maintain a fragile composure. I don't know, he replied, the lie tasting sharp and metallic. Am I my brother's keeper? The divine voice grew firmer, growing in power, piercing through the flimsy shield of every excuse. What have you done? Listen. The voice of your brother's spilled blood cries out to me from the earth itself. Cain swallowed hard, looking down at the very ground that was now his betrayer, and fought desperately not to tremble. God continued the terrible pronouncement. Now you are cursed by the earth, the ground that opened its patient mouth to receive your brother's blood directly from your hands. When you attempt to till the soil, it will no longer yield its strength to you. It will withhold its fruit. You will be a restless wanderer and a perpetual stranger, exiled on the face of the earth. Judgment fell upon him, a crushing, unbearable weight that settled upon his shoulders. Cain recoiled in utter despair and cried out, his voice raw with terror. My punishment is far too great to bear. You will cast me out of this fertile land, and whoever finds me now will surely kill me. But God responded with a complex mixture of justice tempered by unforeseen mercy. Not so. If anyone kills you, they will face a vengeance 7 times over. And the Lord put a protective mark on Cain, an indelible, mysterious sign that shielded him from immediate death, yet did not erase the depth of his guilt or the stain of his crime. Cain was left entirely alone beneath the vast Mesopotamian sky, burdened by the crushing weight of his sin, and the gaping void left by the brother he had murdered and would never see again. The very land he had fiercely worked would now perpetually reject him. And so began his painful journey, the life of a wandering, cursed man carrying a story that would forever mark the destiny of humanity. He left the familiar region where he had grown up, turning his face toward the desolate east. The days were long, marked by scorching heat and endless walking. The nights cold, and every single step seemed to serve only to remind him of the terrible, irreversible thing he had done. The relentless voice of his own conscience accompanied him like an ever-present, malevolent shadow. Finally, after a period of harsh exile, he arrived in a distant region, the land of Nod, a territory already populated by men and women. These people were also descendants of Adam and Eve, generations who had spread outwards over the years, settling far beyond the place of their birth. Many of them had already heard the dark rumor circulating rapidly among the scattered families. Abel had died, and his own brother was the one responsible. When Cain first entered this primitive, cautious village, all eyes turned immediately toward him, drawn by his weary gait and the air of infamy that clung to him. Some workers stopped dead in their tracks, dropping their tools. Others quickly whispered to one another, pointing discreetly. The mark that God had placed upon him, mysterious, starkly visible, and profoundly disconcerting, caused a visceral mix of deep fear and instant rejection. "That's him," a man hissed under his breath, shielding his face slightly. "The one who killed his brother," another replied, pulling his wife closer. "Stay away," a woman warned sternly, forcefully grabbing her young son's hand and drawing him back into the safety of her dwelling. Cain lowered his gaze, his face shielded by his hat. He didn't want conflict or trouble. He simply wanted a place to rest, to survive. He approached a group of men who were working the dusty, sun-baked land. "I'm looking for a place to stay," he said firmly, trying to project a semblance of dignity and strength he didn't feel. One of the men looked him up and down, eyes full of contemptuous pity. "Nobody here wants your company, or your curse," he replied dismissively, spitting on the ground near Cain's feet. "Go somewhere else." Cain pressed his lips together, took a deep, painful breath, and forced himself to continue walking. Others deliberately turned their backs, ignoring his desperate plea. A couple walked swiftly away as they watched him pass. But amid the cold, hostile stares and accusatory whispers, there was a different pair of eyes fixed on him. The eyes belonged to a young woman who observed him from a respectful distance. Her expression was not one of fear, nor was it defined by the community's outright contempt. It was one of genuine curiosity mixed with a quiet, deep compassion. Cain stared at her for a moment, unsure how to interpret her neutral stance. She approached him slowly, cautiously, but she showed no evidence of fear. "You're Cain, aren't you?" she asked, her voice steady. He nodded, his face etched with exhaustion and the burden of his infamy. "Yes, and I know what they think of me." The woman looked at him calmly, her gaze unwavering. "I heard what happened," she said softly, "and I also know that everyone here talks far more than they truly know. I am not afraid of you." Cain frowned, profoundly surprised by her candor. "You shouldn't come any closer," he warned, his voice rough. "I'm carrying a very heavy burden, one that could crush you." She held his gaze, a slight smile touching her lips. "We all carry something, Cain. Some merely hide it better than others. But you are truly alone." Cain remained speechless. No one had spoken to him with such human understanding since the day of his agonizing trial and judgment. "What's your name?" he finally asked, the question escaping his dry throat. "Awan," she replied with a gentle smile. The young woman invited him to walk slowly beside her, accepting his pace. "Come," she said simply. "I want to show you a place where you can stay. Not everyone here will reject you forever. Maybe all you need is a true fresh start." Walking and talking together slowly became a habit. Day after day, Cain worked, building shelters, planting crops, and discovering, perhaps for the very first time since Eden, the possibility of being seen. He was not seen only for his catastrophic mistake, but as a man struggling desperately to get back on his feet. Awan accompanied him through the long days, listening to his silences, understanding his unspoken fears. A closeness grew between them that no one in the hostile community expected or understood. One late afternoon, As the sinking sun cast long, crimson shadows over Nod, Cain looked at her with utter honesty. I didn't think anyone could ever accept me again. Awan smiled, her expression wise beyond her years. You are not defined by what you did in that single dark moment. You are defined by what you choose to be from this moment on. Cain lowered his gaze, deeply moved by her unwavering belief. Thank you for not walking away. She reached out and took his scarred hand firmly. I don't intend to. In time, against all societal expectation and the weight of his curse, they fell deeply in love. And in that distant land of Nod, marked by both ancient pain and budding hope, Cain took Awan as his wife. There, a new life began, unlike anything he had ever dared to imagine. The days passed, the seasons inexorably changed, and Awan soon began to show the undeniable signs of pregnancy. Cain, who had never believed he would receive a second chance at normalcy or goodness, felt a profound emotion he hadn't experienced since his early childhood. Joy, terrifyingly mixed with a paralyzing fear of failure. One afternoon, while she rested on a woven mat, he sat beside her and tenderly took her hand. I don't know if I'm ready for this, Cain whispered, his voice full of doubt. Awan gave him a tired but reassuring smile. No one is ever completely ready for parenthood, she replied gently. But you're going to be a good father. Cain sighed heavily, a hard lump forming in his throat. I just want to get it right this time. Awan squeezed his hand, her gaze demanding his attention. Then start by simply loving this child. That will be enough. The months progressed slowly. Awan's belly swelled, and with it, Cain's cautious hope blossomed. When the day of the birth finally arrived, the entire small village fell into anxious silence. Awan fought fiercely against the pain, surrounded by the capable hands of the village women who assisted her. Cain waited outside the shelter, pacing nervously, trembling uncontrollably, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. Suddenly he heard the sound. A loud, small, insistent cry split the quiet air. One of the women pulled back the heavy curtain of the shelter opening and nodded toward him with a wide, exhausted smile. It's a child. A strong boy. Cain entered slowly, hesitant. Awan, utterly exhausted but radiant with new life, held the swaddled baby securely in her arms. Look at him, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Cain knelt heavily beside her. The child opened his eyes for the first time, looking at the world. Cain felt his chest burst with 1,000 overwhelming emotions. Guilt over the brother he lost, relief that Awan was safe, fierce love for this new life, and an almost paralyzing sense of hope for the future. He's beautiful, he managed to say, his voice cracking with emotion. Awan gently handed him the infant. Take him. Cain received the weight of his son with trembling hands. He looked up at Awan, tears welling in his eyes. Awan, I'm speechless. Give him a name, she instructed. You must. Cain looked at the tiny boy, a powerful mixture of tenderness and resolve filling him. I'll name him Enoch, he finally declared. Let his name mean dedication, a new beginning built upon hope. Awan smiled proudly, leaning her head against his shoulder. Enoch is perfect. With the birth of his son, something fundamentally changed in Cain. The mark he bore on his skin remained, a permanent scar, but the crushing weight he carried in his soul became perceptibly lighter. Shortly thereafter, Cain made a massive decision that would mark human history forever. I'm going to build something for him, he said one day, looking first at Awan and then down at his son sleeping peacefully in his cradle. Something that gives us an identity, a purpose. Something that says we're not just miserable wanderers, doomed to flight. What do you want to build? She asked, intrigued by the sudden fire in his eyes. Cain surveyed the vast, open plain of Nod, the wide lands stretching toward the distant mountains. A city, he replied, his voice firm. A safe, strong place where our son can grow up without fear of the outside world, or of my past. Awan looked at him in surprise, her brow furrowed. A city? Just you? I won't be alone. Cain replied, gesturing to the scattered settlements around them. People will join. They need a permanent home, a center, just as much as we do. And so the long, arduous story began. Day after day, Cain worked tirelessly. He quarried stone for walls, demarcated the boundary lines of the settlement, organized the capable men, and patiently taught the young how to build structures that would last. His leadership was forged from harsh experience, tempered by deep pain, and motivated by an overwhelming desire to protect his family and his growing community. Little by little, that gathering of makeshift shelters began to take the recognizable shape of a city. And it is recorded as the first city mentioned in the entire Bible, the very first urban center in human history recorded by sacred scripture. Awan often watched Cain from a distance, holding Enoch in her arms. She saw a man radically different from the guilt-burdened, desperate fugitive who had first arrived in Nod. Months later, when the first heavy stone structures were fully erected, Cain called Awan to him. "Come, I want to show you something." He led her to the highest point overlooking the entire construction site. "Look," Cain said proudly, his voice resonating with deep satisfaction. "This will be our home, a place to grow strong, to live in peace, and to leave a permanent legacy for our son." Awan watched the city taking shape beneath them and smiled radiantly. "What will you name it?" Cain looked at his son, nestled asleep in his mother's arms, the new hope of his life. "It will be called Enoch," he declared, confirming the dedication. "I want the world to remember that even after my terrible mistake, God allowed me to build something new, something dedicated to life." Awan embraced him tightly. Cain closed his eyes, taking a deep, cleansing breath, acutely aware that his story, a story indelibly marked by the original fall and his subsequent sin, was now also marked by an enduring miraculous grace. And so, in the land of Nod, between those newly erected walls, arose the first city of humanity. A city whose name honored the child who had restored to Cain the hope of living a worthy life. As the years passed, Enoch grew up and the city grew with him. What began as a small, fortified settlement became a vibrant, bustling hub. Dirt roads were trod smooth, simple houses built of clay and stone became more compact, tools became more advanced, fields were organized, and people gathered nightly around the fire for shared conversation and the exchange of food and goods. But while the city prospered materially, something insidious was happening spiritually. Each generation drifted further and further from the simple, pure teachings that Adam and Eve had passed on to their first children. The painful memory of Eden faded into a distant, academic whisper. The authoritative voice of God was no longer heeded with reverence or fear. The city honored its powerful founder, Cain, but openly disdained the God of its ancestors. Cain grew old, watching his people multiply in number, grow in physical strength, and increase in arrogant pride. Enoch, his first son, became a respected leader for his generation. In time, he started his own family and was filled with paternal joy when his son was born. Holding the infant in his arms, he looked at his wife and proclaimed, "Our city is growing, and he will grow to be its protector. I will name him Irad." Scholars explain that Irad's name is related directly to the word for city, and means city dweller or citizen. They gave him that name because Irad was born into a completely urban generation, a people dedicated entirely to the expansion of the city and fiercely proud of its human progress. He grew up surrounded by sturdy walls, compact, organized homes, emerging markets, and a confident people who celebrated human ingenuity, but who had long since ceased to seek the guiding voice of God. In time, Irad also established his own family, and when his son was born, he named him Mehujel. His name, according to the most widely accepted etymology, means God gives life, reflecting a silent, often ignored reality. Although this lineage lived in active defiance and without obeying the Lord's commands, they still possessed the intrinsic, ancient knowledge that life itself originated from him. Mehujel grew up in a constantly moving, expanding city where humanity prospered lavishly in the material sense, but spiritually drifted further and further away from any divine anchor. When Mehujel grew up, he had a son and named him Methuselah. Scholars explained that this name is understood as one whose existence is under the gaze of God, or man observed by God. It is a name that conveyed a profound and terrifying truth. Even if this entire generation chose not to follow God, they remained perpetually under his watchful eye and were subject to his inevitable call to accountability. Methuselah grew up strong, intelligent, and possessed a commanding presence, quickly becoming an influential and powerful figure within the burgeoning city. Methuselah begot Lamech, and in him, the aggressive line of Cain reached its spiritual and moral darkest point. His name is associated fiercely with physical strength, raw power, and unquestioned dominion. It was a name that fit perfectly with the defiant character he developed from a very young age. Lamech grew up to be an imposing, physically powerful man. From childhood, he displayed an uncompromisingly dominant personality, a booming voice, a defiant gaze that challenged all authority, and a natural, intimidating ability to command immediate respect from others. Over time, that strength, which could have been channeled into noble leadership, soured and turned into sheer, unchecked arrogance. The whole city quickly learned to fear his explosive temper, his inflexible will, and his towering pride. In stark contrast to Lamech, the descendant of Seth, whose name meant relief or comfort, and from whom Noah would eventually be born, this Lamech of Cain's line became the ultimate symbol of the moral decay and corruption of his generation. They shared a similar name, but represented violently opposite spiritual realities. One was the fragile thread of hope, the other was total, irredeemable decay. This similarity between names is not merely a linguistic coincidence. Scholars explain that the genealogies of Cain and Seth were deeply intertwined geographically and culturally. They lived in nearby regions, shared similar culture and evolving language, and for centuries their generations observed each other, competing for dominance. Therefore, when Genesis chapter 6 states that the sons of God saw that the daughters of men were beautiful and they took wives for themselves, the text points directly to this volatile mixing. The sons of Seth, who represented the pious, God-fearing line, began to marry the women of the line of Cain. These women were renowned for being extraordinarily beautiful and sensual, distinguished primarily by their outward, physical beauty, a lineage already long fallen and far removed from the Lord. Their seductive nature and moral decay were perfectly reflected in the character of Lamech. But before the ultimate spiritual fall, the story of Lamech continues. Lamech, bloated with self-importance and a lust for display, committed an act never before seen or spoken of in human history. He took 2 wives. From a young age, his dominant character left an indelible mark upon the entire city of Enoch. He watched the ordinary men walk humbly with only one woman by their side and sneered under his breath, a smile dripping with arrogance and contempt. Just one, he murmured as he watched them. Why settle for less when a man like me deserves so much more? His gaze swept across the city's population like a man appraising possessions waiting to be claimed. And one day, as he swaggered among the newly formed, dusty streets, he saw a woman of truly dazzling, captivating beauty. Her name was Ada, which literally means ornament, adornment, or beauty, and this was reflected in every graceful gesture, in her soft, mesmerizing voice, in the way she moved, and in the almost ethereal light that seemed to constantly surround her. Lamech approached her with a determined, predatory stride. You, he said bluntly, without preamble or courtship, will come with me. The whole city will know you are my wife. Ada looked up at him with a seductive expression. Her lips slightly parted before she spoke. Lamech, I do not fear. He immediately interrupted her, cutting her off mid-sentence. You will be honored to be the wife of the strongest, most powerful man in Nod. She lowered her gaze, smiled contentedly, and replied with absolute surrender. Then so be it. In the city, fueled by fear of his temper, no one dared to contradict Lamech's decision. But for him, possessing one woman was utterly insufficient. His desire was not motivated by love or companionship, but by an insatiable need for power and public display. Soon after, his possessive eyes fell upon Zillah. Zillah possessed a beauty distinct from Ada's, more mysterious, deeper, carrying an air of quiet gravity. Her name meant shadow or protection, and her composed presence reflected precisely that, a silent, steadfast aura that was impossible to ignore. Lamech stopped directly in front of her, observing her like a general appraising a conquest he already considered his own. "You, too," he declared, sweeping his hand toward the horizon as if claiming the world. "You won't be the only one, but you will be one of mine." Zillah kept her penetrating gaze fixed on his face, refusing to back down or break eye contact. "Why me?" Lamech smiled proudly, puffing out his chest. "Because I am Lamech. A man of my standing and might isn't limited to just one woman. I take what I want, and you will be my wife." Zillah finally gazed at the horizon, took a long, deep breath, and finally said, resigned, "If that's what you've decided, so be it." That same afternoon, Lamech gathered the men of the city. He stood on a makeshift wooden platform with Ada on one side and Zillah on the other, displaying them openly as if they were prize trophies. "Listen, everyone," he proclaimed loudly, his voice echoing over the gathered crowd. "I, Lamech, am not content with what satisfies common, ordinary men. You all have one woman by your side. I have two, for a powerful man deserves more than the weak man." Some men murmured their disapproval among themselves, their glances cautious. Others, however, not only accepted his arrogance but openly celebrated it as a victory over old laws. When Lamech proudly proclaimed that he would officially take 2 wives, a group of men raised their arms and shouted enthusiastically, waving their tools in the air. "That's right, Lamech. That's exactly how it should be. Why should we settle for one woman when we can have as many as we want? Our women are the most beautiful on earth, not like those descendants of Seth. They are boring, full of moralistic values, obedient to that distant God Jehovah who forbids them from truly enjoying life." The crowd erupted into wild cheers at those defiant words. What had begun as Lamech's personal act of pride and arrogance instantly transformed into a massive public declaration of communal rebellion against the divine order. "Lamech, we support you," several men shouted over the din. "Do it. Be an example for us all. If you take 2 wives, we will too, without an altar, without a priest, and without any fear of God." The city celebrated the idea of lawlessness. Lamech immediately decided to do something unprecedented. A double wedding ceremony that would redefine their morality. Long tables made of freshly cut wood were hastily set up in the town square. Tall torches, secured in the ground, were lit like massive columns of fire, illuminating the entire square with a harsh, flickering light. The men brought great jugs of fermented wine, and the women eagerly prepared rich bread and succulent meats roasted over hot embers. The atmosphere was quickly filled with raucous laughter, loud, lively conversation, and a completely uninhibited, hedonistic spirit. There was no sense of reverence or fear of consequence in the gathering. Only defiance. Reverence. No control. Just a tidal wave of unbridled joy and raw human celebration. The atmosphere was electric, dense with the scent of cheap wine and the heat of thousands of bodies pressed together. In the center of the vast makeshift square, Lamech was the first to ascend. He was strikingly tall, an imposing figure draped in finely woven fabrics dyed in hues that emphasized his formidable strength and status. He raised his arms high, not in prayer, but in a gesture of triumphant ownership, the embodiment of a king who needed no traditional throne because he wielded absolute, unquestioned power over his domain. Ada entered from one side, a vision of dazzling, delicate beauty. Her elegance was palpable, her gaze soft and almost fragile. As she passed, some men leaned in to whisper, their voices thick with admiration. "She is perfection, a jewel fit only for a man of Lamech's might." Zillah arrived from the opposing side. Her beauty was of a different quality, darker, deeper, and profoundly enigmatic. Her presence commanded attention not through outward adornment but through the sheer confidence and purposeful stride with which she walked toward the platform. She was fire where Ada was light. Ada and Zillah ascended to the platform where Lamech awaited, radiating assurance. He took Ada's hand first, then Zillah's, positioning them symmetrically, one on each side, exhibiting them to the vast multitude below as if they were the most precious trophies in his extensive collection. confirmation of his dominance. "Today I declare," he proclaimed in a voice that easily overpowered the clamor of the crowd, echoing across the plaza, "that Ada is my wife, and Zella is my wife also, because a powerful man does not settle for the meager scraps that satisfy the weak. We will not be confined like the timid descendants of Seth, forever bowing to the restrictive laws of a God we have never seen. Here, in Enoch, we are the ones in charge." The men erupted into a chaotic cheer. Jugs of wine were hoisted high, and the sound of excited fists pounding on tables added to the deafening roar. "That's the way it should be," they shouted. "Lamech, set the precedent. Let every man take whomever he desires. Let there be no limits." The atmosphere surged, overflowing its bounds. Waves of laughter, the endless flow of wine, conversations brimming with pride and self-congratulation, shouts of chaotic celebration, and the loud, guttural release of total abandon swept the square. Men and women alike surrendered completely to the rampant euphoria of the night, embracing excess. Ada moved toward Lamech, placing her hand gently, possessively, on his muscular arm. "Everyone's looking at you today, Lamech," she murmured, her voice laced with admiration. "You are truly the most important man in this entire city." Zella, on his other side, leaned in, her voice low and seductive. "And now," she added, "no one will ever be able to rival you." Lamech allowed himself an arrogant, slow smile, gazing down upon the admiring, drunken throng. "This," he announced, raising both hands again, savoring the moment, "is only the beginning. My house will be vast. My lineage will be unbreakably strong, and this entire city will follow the path I forge." The revelry persisted late into the early hours of the morning. Wine flowed without restraint, spilling over the tables, which were soon covered in the ruins of the feast. The city celebrated with reckless intensity, concerned only with the immediate pleasure of the moment. That night, Lamech inaugurated a home as grand in its size as it was fundamentally unstable in its foundation. Days transitioned into weeks, and soon a new development began. Ada started to experience the subtle, unmistakable signs of pregnancy. Zella attended to her, and Lamech watched them both with mounting pride, impatient to multiply his name and extend his legacy. Months later, Ada gave birth to her first son. Lamech took the infant, bestowing a name without visible emotion, as if fulfilling a duty. "He shall be called Jabal." Jabal grew into a boy with an instinctively free spirit. He was drawn to the countryside, the boundless open air, and the company of animals. While other children of Enoch clustered near the safety of the city walls, Jabal constantly ventured farther afield. He developed an innate understanding of how to guide animals, how to make them trust and follow him, and how to provide them comprehensive care. One day, Ada watched him in sheer astonishment. "Son, where did you learn to do that?" she asked. "I don't know," he replied, genuinely puzzled. "I just feel like that's the way it must be done." Unwittingly, through his natural intuition and skill, Jabal became the progenitor, the father of those who live in woven tents and successfully raise livestock. No one before him had figured out the intricacies of animal domestication. No one had previously envisioned a portable, mobile lifestyle, guided by the movement of flocks and unbound by the constraints of stone walls. Years later, Ada conceived again. Her second son was delivered on a tranquil night. Lamech named him Jubal. Over time, Jubal developed a profound sensitivity to sound. He would strike different objects, listen intently, blow into hollow reeds, and experiment by plucking stretched strings. One afternoon, Ada heard a melodic sequence she'd never encountered and approached him, captivated. "What are you creating?" "I don't know," he replied, already absorbed in his craft, "but it sounds alive." Without fully comprehending the magnitude of his work, Jubal became the father of all those who play the sophisticated strains of the harp and the resonant notes of the flute. He was the initiator of formalized music, the visionary who first transformed raw sound into a defined art form. While this was unfolding in Ada's household, Zella was also carrying life. Her son was born on a still, quiet night, and Lamech gave him a weighty, resonant name, Tubal-Cain. Tubal-Cain grew up utterly captivated by the nature of metals. He gravitated toward the roaring fire, relentlessly hammered stones, experimented with extreme heat, and gradually learned that hard metal could be forced to yield and obey the will of man. One day he called excitedly for his mother. "Look at this," he said, presenting a newly forged sharp tool. "Fire changes stone, and I can shape it to be useful." Zella watched him, her surprise mixed with a flicker of fear. "How did you possibly discover that?" "The earth teaches it," he stated with chilling certainty. "You just have to listen to it patiently." No one before him had successfully worked bronze and iron. Tubal-Cain became the father of all blacksmiths, the first metallurgist, the primary creator of sophisticated tools, lethal weapons, and everyday utensils. Zella also bore a daughter, Naamah, a girl of inherent natural grace, possessing a deep, penetrating gaze and a harmonious presence that instantly calmed a room. Her name was intended to mean pleasant, agreeable, or charming. According to certain ancient traditions, Naamah is credited with introducing the art of personal adornment, the use of exotic perfumes, and the complex beautification of the body. Her innate ability to create beauty, order, and visual harmony made her an immensely admired and influential figure throughout the burgeoning city. Thus, the sons and daughter of Lamech, each endowed with a unique and powerful gift, became the true pioneers of early human civilization. Jabal, the father of the nomadic tent dwellers and the keeper of livestock. Jubal, the father of music and the sonic arts. Tubal-Cain, the father of metalworkers and the originator of early technology. Naamah, the woman whose grace and artistic sense refined the otherwise rough and brutal world. They were history's first great innovators, yet they were born in a land devoid of any altar, without any true worship, and crucially, without the saving fear of the Lord. What began as extraordinary skill and ingenious invention soon twisted into potent instruments of human corruption. In the rapidly expanding city of Enoch, these incredible discoveries swiftly ceased to be merely signs of ingenuity. They became dangerous weapons wielded by human pride. Jabal had indeed paved the way for nomadic life, but now his massive flocks served only to enrich the violent men who seized them. His wealth served to strengthen the powerful, feeding those who ruled by sheer force along the city's outskirts. His name became more synonymous with brute wealth than with careful wisdom. But it was through Jubal that the social decline began to become visibly widespread in the streets. His revolutionary sounds, which had initially been sources of curiosity and deep wonder, now began to take captive the hearts of the citizens. The city became saturated with constant, sprawling gatherings, never-ending celebrations, and destructive excess. In a torchlit square, the men congregated around Jubal, who strummed his harp. "Play something louder," one man yelled, hoisting a clay jug filled with dark, strong wine. "Something that will make us forget the exhaustion of the day's work." Jubal smiled, a look of arrogant pride crossing his features. He struck the strings with greater force, blew harder and more aggressively into his instruments. The sound became intensely rhythmic, overwhelmingly intoxicating, and utterly enticing. "Let this night never end," another man screamed into the air. "Let no one think. Let no one remember anything else." Jubal offered no resistance to their debauchery. On the contrary, he dramatically increased the tempo, whipping their bodies into a frenzy, igniting their primal impulses. The parties grew longer, wilder, and increasingly out of control. As the wine flowed freely, prudence was entirely lost, and reckless revelry became the defining social norm. During one of these endless nights, as the music pulsed and echoed between the city's dense stone walls, two men conversed amid bursts of harsh laughter. "This," one of them said, pointing dismissively toward Jubal, "this is true living. Not like those weak descendants of Seth, always burdened by their rules, always talking about some concept of purity." "Leave them to their old stories," the other replied, taking a long drink. "We have the music, we have the wine, we have the women. What more could we possibly need?" The city responded to this sentiment with unified shouts, thunderous applause, and primal cries of euphoria. But while Jubal's music inflamed their base impulses, on the far side of the city, Tubal-Cain was igniting something far more dangerous. Where he labored, there was no laughter or careless noise. There was only the roar of the fire, the ominous glow of red-hot metal, and the relentless, deafening pounding of hammers. Men formed long lines, waiting anxiously to obtain his latest, most deadly creations. "Give me a sharper one," demanded one client. "The last blade didn't cut as cleanly as you promised." Tubal-Cain looked at him with cold, professional detachment. "If it doesn't cut," he retorted, "it's because you lack the skill to use it properly." Another man approached, his smile crooked and predatory. "Can you make it heavier? I need it to be so devastating that, when it strikes, the target can never rise again." Tubal-Cain showed no hesitation, no moral compunction whatsoever. "I can forge it precisely however you desire," he replied. Iron obeys. In a surprisingly short period, Enoch transitioned from being merely a prosperous city to becoming a fully armed city. Disputes began to erupt violently in the streets. On nearly every corner, men openly challenged each other. Differences were no longer settled through cautious words or negotiation, but with the brutal, gleaming authority of forged metal. On a night that seemed entirely ordinary, two rival groups clashed suddenly. "Don't you ever look at me that way again," one man shouted, his voice laced with menace. "Or what?" the other challenged, immediately pulling out a polished, gleaming metal blade. "Are you afraid of this?" The tension immediately exploded into chaotic action. The hideous sound of clashing metal, screams of pain, the dull thud of blows, and soon crimson blood staining the dry ground. From his tall, imposing house high above, Lamech watched the violence unfold, not with sadness or alarm, but with deep pride in his son's deadly inventions. That, he murmured to himself, watching the carnage, that is true power. His outward boasting was a mere reflection of his inner reality. Lamech was a deeply, fundamentally violent man. Everyone in the city knew this truth, not through gossip, but through paralyzing fear. His name was no longer spoken with respect, but with profound caution, precisely because he had willingly stained his hands with blood, and he made no attempt to hide it. He felt no lament. He openly proclaimed his deeds. One night, he summoned his wives, Ada and Zella. The flickering fire within the hearth cast long, dancing shadows on the walls of his massive house. They watched him in heavy silence, anticipation thick in the air. Lamech sat up slowly, projecting the absolute confidence of a man who profoundly enjoyed his own authority. "Listen closely," he commanded. "I want you both to remember this, and I want everyone in this house to remember it always." Both women remained utterly attentive. Then, in a firm, arrogant voice, he proclaimed the ancient, terrible poem that Scripture preserves in Genesis 4 verses 23 to 24. "Ada and Zillah, hear my voice. Listen, wives of Lamech. I have killed a man for wounding me, and a young man for striking me. If one who kills Cain is punished sevenfold, then one who kills me will be punished 77 times. Here an ancient tradition arises, mentioned by some early scholars and later Jewish sources. It has been suggested that this poem was far more than a simple boast of revenge. Rather, Lamech may have uttered these words after accidentally killing his ancestor, Cain, mistaking him for a wild animal or a threat during a hunt, perhaps due to Cain's extreme old age or Lamech's own fading eyesight. According to that powerful tradition, upon the horrifying realization of whom he had killed, Lamech's reaction was not one of remorse or despair, but an immediate, furious act of justification. It was as if he were declaring, if Cain, the first murderer, was protected by divine promise for killing his brother, then I, who accidentally killed the protected Cain, will be shielded and avenged exponentially more. While there is no absolute biblical certainty on this specific event, the tradition powerfully reflects the character that the text clearly shows. Lamech was not a humble man. He was arrogant, aggressive, and utterly unrepentant. He did not break down in sorrow. He exalted himself in violence. After the chilling recitation of his poem, a heavy silence settled over the room. Ada clasped her hands tightly. Zella lowered her gaze slightly, unable to meet his eyes. "Why are you saying this in front of us?" Ada asked cautiously, her voice barely a whisper. Lamech offered a small, terrifying smile. Because I want everyone to know. I don't want anyone to imagine for a moment that my hand is weak. I don't want anyone to ever be mistaken about who I am. Zella watched him, genuine unease in her posture. Aren't you afraid of God? She whispered, challenging him softly. Lamech looked at her harshly, his eyes cold and hard. Afraid? Cain was afraid, and yet he was protected. I am not afraid. I am greater than he was. Ada broke the tense silence again. And what if someone is not afraid of that 77-fold threat? Lamech? He gave her a long, cold look that silenced her instantly. Then they will be taught to fear it. Zella did not respond further. She merely stared fixedly into the dancing fire, and in that agonizing moment, the horrifying truth became perfectly clear. Lamech did not perceive his violence as sin or error. He saw it only as ultimate authority, as a definitive legacy he intended to pass down. And so, as the city of Enoch grew exponentially stronger in culture, technology, and skill, blood and immorality began to become utterly commonplace. So commonplace, in fact, that these acts ceased to shock the hardened citizens. So commonplace that no one bothered to question them anymore. And in that morally bankrupt setting, something else began to happen. Outside the fortified walls of Enoch lived another lineage, the descendants of Seth. These were men shaped by a different, quieter heritage. Men who intentionally called upon the name of the Lord. Men who had grown up indoctrinated with a fundamentally different, God-centered worldview. But the city of Enoch continued to grow. It expanded its influence. It beckoned irresistibly. At first, the sons of Seth arrived only out of pure necessity. They journeyed from the nearby lands to acquire essential tools, superior utensils, and implements for their work. Tubal-Cain's forged works had become immensely famous. No one else could forge metal with his quality and precision. In the initial days, they arrived cautiously, like wary travelers entering a dangerous marketplace. We are only here for the tools, one of them confirmed nervously as he reached the formidable gates. Nothing more. The town's merchants smiled knowingly. They all say the same thing at first, one chuckled. As they tentatively wandered the congested, loud streets, the Sethites were shaken by a stimulus they had never before encountered. From the plazas, from the open courtyards, and from the houses where large crowds gathered new, overwhelming sounds emerged, vibrations they instinctively did not recognize. Rhythms they had never heard before. It was the seductive, insistent music of Jubal. One of the Sethites stopped abruptly, his face tense with discomfort. "What is that noise?" he asked quietly. "That is music." A man from the city of Enoch replied with a broad, confident smile. "No one celebrates here without it." The intense sounds enveloped them. They penetrated their defenses. They deeply unsettled their spirits. "In our lands, we only hear the wind and the voice of God," one of the Sethites observed. "Here," another replied with pride, "we leave no room for silence." And while their senses were still adjusting to the sonic assault, their eyes encountered another, equally powerful reality. The women descended from Cain. They were nothing like the simple women of their own lineage. They did not possess the same inherent simplicity, nor did they walk with the same quiet modesty. These women were exquisitely adorned, dressed in clothes that stood out dramatically. Their gestures were calculatedly provocative. Their presence could not, under any circumstances, go unnoticed. They moved with cultivated confidence, with a practiced sensuality learned at the endless parties. Their grace honed amidst the intoxicating mixture of music, wine, and wild celebration. One of Seth's men froze completely as a group of them passed by. "Who are they?" he whispered, utterly transfixed. A merchant from Enoch smiled, enjoying the reaction. "They are the daughters of our lineage, the descendants of Cain." "No woman in your lands moves like that," another voice replied, observing the effect they had. The men of Seth exchanged charged glances. "We've never seen women like them." The descendants of Cain did not seek God. They did not truly know him, but they knew with absolute certainty how to attract. They knew how to provoke a response. They knew how to command and hold attention. One of the women, beautiful and bold, approached one of the foreign men while he was examining a metal tool. "You're a Sethite, aren't you?" she asked softly, her gaze intense. He nodded, unable to speak. "It shows in your eyes," she continued, leaning closer. "You're still not used to the life of this city." He swallowed hard. "In our lands, it is not like this." She smiled slowly, a promise in the gesture. "That's precisely why they always come back." And then she walked away, but the Sethite could not stop watching her retreating figure. And so the days turned into weeks. The sons of Seth returned, and then they returned again. Soon, they were no longer returning just for the superior metal tools. They returned for them, for the captivating women descended from Cain. And what is recorded in Genesis 6 began to be tragically fulfilled. When the sons of God, the faithful line of Seth, saw that the daughters of men, the alluring women of Cain's lineage, were exceptionally beautiful, they took wives for themselves, choosing any and all they wanted. The daughters of men were striking, sensual, beautifully adorned, and raised entirely within a fallen, hedonistic culture. The sons of Seth, who had once solemnly invoked the name of the Lord, began to be irresistibly attracted by what they saw with their eyes, and they stopped listening to the core truths they had always believed. In a luxurious house in the city of Enoch, a young woman from the line of Cain spoke mockingly to one of the visiting Sethites. "They say you speak with God," she said, her lips curving into a cynical smile. "But no one here needs his distant voice." He hesitated, a deep, inherited guilt visible in his eyes. "Our parents told us that life was to be found there." "And what about you?" she asked, moving closer, invading his space. "Do you truly want to inherit old, dusty words? Or do you want to feel what is real, right now?" He remained silent, and he understood too late. That silence marked his definitive fall. They mingled. They united not out of faithful obedience or commitment, but out of pure, overwhelming desire. And from that corrupt mixture were born powerful, violent, domineering men, giants, the brave heroes according to the fallen world. Yet men who were not closer to God, but terrifyingly farther away. And so, corruption spread like a plague. As a consequence, great wickedness covered the earth. Every single inclination of the thoughts of men's hearts was continually and utterly evil. The parties multiplied beyond counting. Music transformed into a precise tool of calculated seduction. Beauty became a dangerous trap. Strength mutated into brutal pride. The entire earth began, slowly but surely, to forget its creator. Not in a single day, but step by step, glance by glance, desire by consuming desire. What had once been confined only to the city of Enoch now became a heartbreaking reflection of the entire world. And then heaven looked down. God saw the widespread, universal corruption, not just in a few individuals but profoundly affecting every single generation. He saw the children of Cain consumed by relentless violence, unrestrained debauchery, and towering pride. He saw the children of Seth, driven solely by lust and misplaced desire, deliberately turning their backs on the faith they had once inherited. And God, seeing all this destruction, declared, "The wickedness of mankind is great in the earth, and every inclination of the thoughts of their hearts is only evil continually. I deeply regret that I have made mankind on earth, and my heart is deeply grieved. Therefore, I will wipe from the face of the earth the human race I have created, human beings and animals, reptiles and birds, for I regret that I have made them." But all was not entirely lost. In the absolute midst of a globally corrupt generation, there was one man who walked a different path. His name was Noah. He had refused to mingle with the restless, rebellious spirit of the age. He did not follow the wild parties. He had not surrendered to the spirit of outright rebellion. He and his faithful household stood firm, distinct and obedient. God spoke to him, not in the midst of the chaos and deafening noise, but in the profound silence where he could still be heard. "The end of all flesh is before me," he told Noah, "for the earth is filled with violence because of them. I will bring a flood upon the earth, but you shall construct an ark to preserve your life and the life of your household." And Noah obeyed immediately. He began to build, blow after laborious blow, wood upon massive wood, day after relentless day. And as the huge ark slowly took shape on the plain, a structure so enormous that many stopped simply to gawk at it, Noah did not remain silent. He raised his voice, turning first to the descendants of Cain. Children of Cain, listen to me. Your violence has risen up as an unbearable stench before God. Your ways do not please him. There is still time. Repent and turn from your wicked ways before judgment inevitably comes. They scoffed openly, laughing in his face. Judgment! One man shouted, slapping his knee in scorn. Our fathers, Cain and Lamech, would laugh at you. Look at us. Our lineage has constructed an advanced civilization with our bare hands and our brilliant inventions. Even the tools you are using to build that absurd thing were created by our father, Cain. You should be grateful for our genius. Keep building your big box, Noah. Another yelled from a safe distance. When it starts to rain, be sure to let us know. But Noah did not stop his work. He then turned to the descendants of Seth. Sons of Seth, my brothers according to the flesh, you know the sacred name of the Lord. You have heard his voice through your faithful fathers. Return to him now. He can still stay his judgment if you humble yourselves before him. One of them replied wearily, Noah, the world has irrevocably changed. It's not like it used to be, and your God seems very far away. Another smiled contemptuously. Your God threatens us, but everything remains exactly the same. We see no change. Noah looked at them with profound sorrow. Do not harden your hearts, for the day is coming when there will be no more time for repentance. But the parties continued unabated. The taunts did not cease. The infectious music never stopped. The violence kept escalating, mercilessly, and the ark kept rising, imposing itself before a world that willfully refused to listen. Until the day arrived. The sky became deeply overcast. The wind changed direction, carrying a sudden, inexplicable chill. Noah entered the ark with his wife, his sons, and their wives. The animals also entered, each according to its kind, moving in an orderly procession. And God himself with finality closed the door. The torrential waters began to fall. The foundations of the abyss opened with a terrifying roar. The rain descended without ceasing, turning the world into a liquid chaos. Those outside screamed desperately. Some cried out, Noah, open the door. Now we believe. But there was no reply. The massive door would not budge, sealed by divine decree, and the waters rapidly covered the land. They washed away the mighty stone walls of the city of Enoch that Cain had built in his pride. The fires where Lamech had boasted of his violence were instantly extinguished. The frantic music that had once sounded so powerful in the hands of Jubal fell silent. Forever. The lethal weapons forged by Cain rusted away uselessly beneath the rising waves. The fields where Cain's descendants had prospered vanished under the weight of judgment. The violent, the arrogant, those who had mocked and those who gloried in their own strength were swallowed by the deep waters. The city that grew without an altar, focused only on human invention and indulgence, was utterly wiped from the face of the earth. And so the lineage of Cain was extinguished entirely, and also those descendants of Seth who had chosen to join the Cainite rebellion. But Noah remained, a singular testament to Seth's faithful legacy, and through him, God preserved a new, fragile humanity. For even in the very midst of devastating judgment, he faithfully maintains his ultimate purpose.